Let's share a word of prayer. Oh God, we come to you today on this beautiful day, this day that will be filled with opportunities, and we're grateful that we'll take advantage of some, and some we probably won't. There will be opportunities to do your work that we may find ourselves ignoring, and there will be other opportunities where we may grab it and run with it and just be your faithful servants. Help us now to be faithful in our study, that as we look into your holy word, that we might find that its meaning for us is something that we can carry with us as we leave this place and will infect our lives with all good things. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. And we're on chapter 6, and we're going to cover two of the stories. And they are going back to the 7 signs in John. These are signs 4 and 5. The feeding of the 5,000 and the walking on the water. But let's start with the feeding of the 5,000 with a couple of theories that have been raised as to how this miracle can be explained in human terms. One is that these people actually brought food with them, but they weren't sure that others did, so they didn't want to pull it out and share it until Jesus started sharing food, and then they felt comfortable doing so. That's one theory that's been tossed out. Another is, I'll call it the stone soup theory, which is, do you know the story of stone soup?
Yes, sort of.
Okay, this gypsy couple comes into town, they're broke, they're hungry, nobody will give them any food. They go to the local stream, they get a bucket of water, they put it over a fire and throw a couple of stones in it, and people come up to say, "What are you doing?" And, "Well, we're making stone soup." And they take a sip of it and they say, "Oh, it's not bad, not bad, but boy, it sure would taste good if there were some carrots." And so, "Well, I have some carrots." And they go through this whole litany of ingredients till finally they take the stones out, but they have this wonderful soup because everybody cooperated. And you know, one of the other theories is that this was an act of cooperation where people felt that they were encouraged to share what little they had in order to make it into something fantastic. Now, the reality is, that those theories don't necessarily hold up, because we oftentimes find ourselves struck with the reality that the miracles are always one step beyond what we can explain. We can almost reach for them, but they're still out of reach. And to some extent, the miracle is something to be appreciated rather than explained. And I think I've said before that I go by that theory that the older I get, the less I feel I have to explain to others about my faith. So I'm comfortable saying with the miracle stories that I don't really understand them, but I accept them for what they are. And in this incident, one of the things that we have is that the crowd has begun to follow Jesus because of the signs that he had been doing. He is a changer of water into wine. He's a faith healer. He's got these amazing gifts, and people start to follow him because of this. And in following him, they find themselves rather deserted out on a mountainside where Jesus has been doing some teaching. But lo and behold, this teaching goes on for so long that people start to get hungry. And Jesus wants to be hospitable to them, and so he tells the disciples to go ahead and feed them. And the reality is the provisions available to feed the people are really sparse. And so Jesus has the people sit down, he blesses the food, he hands it out to the disciples to say, distribute this, and then if there's any left, collect it. And they must have felt, the disciple, what do you mean if there's any left? You know, we're going to be out of this stuff by the time we get past the third person that we're delivering to. But they end up having more than enough. And they end up collecting the leftovers. And perhaps that is what drives the miracle. Because if they simply handed out what they had, we'd say, okay, there were some people who went hungry and or didn't have as much as they want, even though it says they had their fill. But the fact that they had their fill and there was stuff left over really drives home the miraculous quality of what took place. But it raises the question of when we're reading the Bible, especially when we're reading about Jesus, and there is a miracle, how do we read it? And some of us who have been raised on some of these stories may know them too well. And in knowing them too well, we kind of gloss over them. You know, or we may say, oh, that was really nice, but we don't give a whole lot of critical thought to what took place. We're not awestruck as John's first readers must have been. You know, there must have been an initial response of almost shock that this was able to take place.
I wonder if that's the result that he wanted. Not to say that he wanted to prove himself, but maybe to say it worked before, I got their attention before with a miracle. Maybe this will get their attention also.
And I think in John, Jesus is more apt to want people to know who he is. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where we have this messianic secret, where Jesus will do things, but say, then tell the people, don't say anything about it. In John, these signs are meant to be outward testimonies as to who Jesus is. You know, John at the end of his writing says that he basically presented this gospel so that people will believe. where in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we have to be more thoughtful into what's going on here. What's the purpose?
Maybe Christ knew that John was going to write this chapter, and people like Pastor Dave, who's going to hold Bible studies, and they're believers at this day and age.
Well, I think that if you look at John being the disciple John, the one whom Jesus loved, the one who was at the foot of the cross, you're looking at someone who is presenting a testimony to what he experienced and saw. You know, it's not that he heard a story that he's writing down. It's that he was part of the story. He was involved in the story. And he's saying that this is why his testimony can be believed, because he was there. I think if you look at particularly Matthew and Luke, it's easy to see where, okay, somewhere along the line they took parts of Mark and embellished it in their accounts. But that, you know, obviously it's secondhand. It's not that they're giving their own eyewitness testimony. Now, there are some scholars who think that the Gospel of John is the latest of the Gospels and could have been written as far later as like 125 AD, which would put obviously that John would not be the John, because he would then be roughly 125 years old. But none of those theories are bulletproof. So if we take these teachings from a spiritual level, we accept them in a different way than if we're trying to decipher them as history, as verbatim history. You know, it's a combination of, okay, this writer is saying I was there, but there are some indications that, well, maybe he couldn't have been there because of what the story's telling. And but if we allow that to take away from the impact of the story itself, then we're kind of missing what it's all about. And in this teaching, or in this feeding miracle, what we come to a conclusion with, one of the conclusions, is Jesus takes what we have and makes it enough. One buddy of mine who has been through the absolute hell ringer. And this guy, if there's a disease, he's had it. And he's still kicking in his early 80s, but has fought everything. And one of the things he keeps saying is that God has never given him anything more than he could handle. You know, and that's the way God operates. God makes sure that we have what we need. In this case, it's a real extreme example, but by and large, most of us would have to testify that our needs have been met. And in many cases, not only have our needs been met, but there's been something left over too.
That's like that fellow that I met in Montana who was, he was, I think, probably my age, but he's very vocal about it. He tells everybody, he said that when he took Jesus Christ as his Savior, and he had been in Vietnam, and he has all kinds of health problems. And to watch the man walk around is difficult. He's had cancer, and yet he just keeps on going and keeps on going, and he has so much faith, and everything is good, even with all the problems that he has. He was an amazing guy. It was very interesting. I really liked talking to him.
Well, Henry Nouwen, in his book, The Wounded Healer, kind of alludes to the point that it's in our pain and suffering that we find our strength. Because in the other parts of life, we don't need it. These people who were fed with very few provisions, probably most of their lives never worried about their next meal. It was when they were out in this desolate area that Jesus at least started to recognize that they hadn't eaten in a while, and that there wasn't a lot of food to go around, nor was it even feasible to find somebody to cater a meal for that many people. And if they found someone who would do it, they couldn't afford it. You know, feeding 5,000 people would be a little on the expensive side. You know,
There was a sentence in there about wages, about how much it would cost. And I thought, well, what are they basing their wages on? It was one of the disciples talked about it would be a month of wages.
Yeah, a denarii would be about a month.
20 cents.
Yeah, it's the economics of it would mean it can't work. You know, there's one of the things with a miracle is it flies in the face of what can't happen. You know, we can't get it in our heads that this could happen. The miracle says it can. And that holds true for many of the miracles, you know. Many of the miracles that we experience, and I think we all experience them. We may not always recognize them, but quite frankly, getting out of bed in the morning has a certain miraculous content to it. Facing whatever adversity we are facing is a miracle. You know, it would be so easy for us to give up a lot of times, but the miracle is we keep going. Or, you know, the miracle is when we get far beyond anything that we really deserve. And if we accept the idea that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, most of what we have is gift and not earned. And gift itself is a miracle. And sometimes it's helpful to me to intentionally look at something and see the miracle in it. If not, I might take it for granted. You know, you know, we've all been through stuff, and the miracle is we've made it through. So that's a powerful message right then and there. The other miracle, the fifth sign, is this walking on water that Jesus does. And you know, it goes back to the old story of the priest, the minister, and the rabbi are out fishing in the lake, and the priest says, "Oh my God, I forgot the sacramental wine," and he gets and walks across the water and gets the wine and comes back. The rabbi says, "Oh, I forgot my lunch," and he gets and walks across the water and comes back. And the minister says, "Oh, I forgot to get my Bible," and he walks and he sinks. And the minister and the rabbi say to each other, "We should have told him where the rocks are." You know, there are a variety of scientific explanations that people try to give for a miracle such as this, such as Jesus walked on a sandbar, you know, and things like that A, make no sense, and B, just try to diminish the importance of the miracle itself. And one of the reasons that people might be apt to diminish the power of the miracle is they want to stress more Jesus's human side than his divine side. And that has been an ongoing debate. You know, we understand Jesus is fully human and fully divine, but that mathematical thing confuses us because we're not used to 200%. You know, it's like it's 50-50 or whatever, but so there's arguments that are put forth about, well, he was more human than divine, more divine than human. On the cross, did he feel the pain of a human or no pain as a God? Yeah, and probably something like that is best debated in a sidewalk cafe with a stein full of whatever's on tap, and sitting there thinking as if this is the most important issue in the entire history of humanity that we need to solve. And by about the seventh beer, you've finally come to a conclusion that you have the answer that no one else has ever been able to fathom. But that is the job of a theologian, to try to figure out, to try to make sense out of stuff that doesn't make sense. And it's part of the standard drive, I think, of humanity, is we try to make sense out of things that don't make sense. One of the things that is the human response to so much is asking why. As if we answer the question why, that somehow indicates that we're on top of things. So if I say something to somebody that's really stupid and say to myself, now why did I say that? That there might be a way that I can logically explain to my own head why I decided to say something stupid, and that will make it okay. Well, it's as if I can say, why did Jesus walk across the water? How did he walk across the water? That if only I can get an answer that makes sense, that will resolve everything. And we go back with both of these miracles essentially to Thomas Jefferson and these deists who believed in God but didn't necessarily believe that God was involved with humanity, and that they were rationalists in a way, where if they couldn't think things through rationally, they just acted as though it didn't happen. The Jefferson Bible is the Gospels without the miracle stories. It's essentially the teachings of Jesus, but not the miracles. Because the teachings are explainable, the miracles are not. The fly in the ointment oftentimes is that axiom of what would Jesus do? Okay, and we say, well, gosh, I've got a gazillion hungry people, and I've got 5 fish and 2 loaves of bread. What would Jesus do? Well, he'd feed the people. Well, that may be outside of my capacity, but what do I do to work as much as I can for it? If we feed 74 people on a Sunday, that's 74 more than wouldn't have been fed if we hadn't done it. That's our miracle, that we have enough to feed 74 people or whatever.
And have leftovers.
And have leftovers, yeah. You look at maybe one of the great miracles is a Methodist potluck, where there is always more than enough food, no matter who shows up without bringing anything. You know, that these miracles occur. The difference that we have in the two in this chapter are, one, the feeding of the 5,000 is a miracle that Jesus does to serve other people. The walking on water is a miracle Jesus does just to show who he is. That you know, he really doesn't necessarily have any major reason to have to do this other than it displays his power. And that's, again, very important for John. You know, John wants to say, look ye here. You know, you better pay some attention to this. And you know, the fact that he then kind of calms the storm is almost an additive to that story. Because, yeah, first of all, they see him walking on the water and they're scared to death. They're already scared to death because the weather is not real good. And then they become even more scared to death because they see Jesus and think he's a ghost. And then they finally get everything calmed down and everybody takes a deep breath and says, everything's okay.
How did you do that?
Now, well, and spiritually speaking, or looking at this as imagery, and in our own lives, when there is a storm front brewing, accepting the presence of Jesus in that helps calm it down a little. Now, being human, we may not want to completely give it over to Jesus' love, but we give some of it over. And the burden might be eased, even if it's not eliminated. Because there are some storms in life that are not going to resolve themselves immediately. I think of when we've lost loved ones, that grief did not just, we didn't lose a loved one on a Tuesday and on Wednesday wake up and say, well, I'm over that. You know, that sometimes time takes time and things work themselves out over time with the presence of Jesus in our lives. If you've ever found yourself in a deep bind with something, you know, it may be that as much as we might pray for the miracle, you know, I go out and I buy a tuba and I pray, God, please don't let Laura know how much I spend. And the bill comes in. It's like, oh, well, thanks, Jesus. You know, at least you could have written it down a little bit.
It's like, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please.
It's like, I used to be terrified of flying. I mean, white knuckle. I used to take like anti-anxiety when I flew. It was awful. And it was the strangest thing. One day, I said to myself, if God's going to take me, He's going to take me no matter where I am. And ever since, it's the craziest thing. And ever since then, I'm, you know,
Yeah.
even with turbulence, and I don't know how I got there, but it's just like, no, I don't really worry about flying anymore.
Yeah, and I think stuff like that is respecting the miracle part of it. That, you know, if we overcome a fear, if we overcome a hardship, if we overcome our own mistakes, these are all miracles that if we were left to our own human devices, we may not overcome. You know, yes, in say an illness, there is a certain reality that someone's attitude plays a major part in getting them through. But part of that attitude is that something beyond themselves can help bring healing along with the doctors. A certain reality of being able to say, gosh, there is a God and I'm not it. That I need to rely on this outside force, however one might care to describe it, that tells me even in the midst of the storm, everything's going to be all right. You know, I'm going to have to weather this, but in the end, everything's going to be okay.
Even if it's not.
Even if it's not, yeah. You know, I look at, say, the manageability of life. Well, part of making life manageable at times is me changing my definition of what manageable is. And where my definition of manageable may start with, I'm set for life. That definition may change to, I have enough for today. That there's that type of reframing. That give us this day our daily bread, not give us this day 35 years of healthy, wealthy retirement. If I get what I need today, that miracle has occurred today, and I'm going to be grateful for that today. And hopefully in my prayers, I'm going to say thank you for that today, and not just say, look what I've done.
Hear that, Doris? Good enough.
Good enough, Doris. In looking at these miracles, A, can we identify minor miracles in our own lives, even if we didn't recognize it at the time? Because I think oftentimes they go unrecognized at first. We're just happy that something happened, but we don't necessarily attribute it to something other than fate or coincidence. Besides, as I've gotten older, not feeling that I have to explain everything about my faith, is I become less and less invested in thinking that there are coincidences in life. The more I think there is divine intervention in life that is there for a purpose, that it's my job to discover what that purpose is and act on it. I remember my uncle, when he was probably 61 or 62. Really wasn't retirement age. He worked for a bank, and they were bought out, and they cleared house, and he was one that was let go. And I kind of just called to say, hey, I'm sorry that you lost your job. And his response was, well, it's only because God has something else planned for me. And that it was his job to figure out what that was. But that what I was identifying as a negative in his life, he was reframing as an opportunity. He just had to find out what that was all about. I think we find that a lot in life, that something doesn't go our way and we bemoan it, when maybe we could also be asking, what's the opportunity in this? What does God want out of this for me? And perhaps it goes back to that wounded healer concept of Henry Nouwen, that the greatest gift that I've been given at times is a sense of grief that allows me to connect with the grief of others. It really humanizes me. I don't have to be stoic in the face of grief, that I can use that to connect to somebody else's grief and say, maybe not say, it's bad to say I completely understand, but being able to empathize with somebody. We had when I took clinical pastoral education at Easton Hospital, there were a group of us that were chaplains, and we had one guy. He was a moron, but we had to do verbatims, which is where you go visit a patient and then you have to write down everything as best as you can remember that was said. And he went to visit a woman who unfortunately had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And his response to her was, "I know exactly how you feel." And it was, that's where he got his nickname of moron. I may not be able to connect with your issue, but I can connect with your grief. I can connect with your feeling of despair. I can connect because even though I haven't experienced what you're going through, I've been through things. And if I'm willing to mine the feelings that I had in those things, then I can connect with you. I don't have to have answers to your problems. I just have to be willing to be present in your problems. And that becomes a miracle. You know, the miracle of somebody passes away and the next thing you know, people are bringing food and hugs and well wishes and everything else. They can't bring back the loved one, but what they're doing is saying, maybe part of the miracle of this is that we're just able to connect with you. And go with that. So when we look at these miracles, there's always an invitation to take the story and somehow build a bridge between what's going on in the story and something that's going on in our lives. Whether it's, I'm sure there are people out there who can say, yeah, I know what it's like to go hungry and to finally have enough food. And they can make more of a direct connection. But to look for a connection. And see Jesus in the resolution or in the resolution to your issue. That there was miracle involved here. Well, let me kind of cut it off at that and just ask you to ponder. You don't need to share anything, but just ponder the idea of what are some of those things that have happened in my life that, quite frankly, shouldn't have happened. Those things that worked out that shouldn't have worked out. The times when there was something that occurred that maybe wasn't good, but boy, it could have been a lot worse. You have those things that happen. Go back to Tom was asking about Jaden and talking about his little episode of going a little too fast. I wanted to say to him, 26 over the speed limit, that ain't nothing. I mean, we used to drag race on Sawmill Road, and it's a miracle that I made it. Uh,
And sometimes things happen, and I think I've probably said this before. I was at a wedding, and a woman that I knew, her daughter had died of an overdose.
mhm.
And her name was Kim, I don't remember her mom's name. And when I was talking to her, I said to her, I'm so sorry about Kim, I heard, I'm so sorry. Well, she started to cry and she walked away. And I thought, oh. She came back and she said to me, she said, I know I was upset, but thank you so much. She said, nobody wants to talk to me
Acknowledge it.
about my daughter, and I don't want her to be forgotten.
Mhm.
She said, so as much as it upsets me, she said, thank you so much. She said, because I want her memory to, and so sometimes I think God puts words in your mouth or something, but, so then I felt better, because initially I thought, oh, geez,
Shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
she was thankful, and I think that's a problem too. People are afraid to say anything, and people who've lost someone, you do want them to be remembered,
Mhm.
so, but it's a fine line.
Well, you don't want to say the wrong thing,
Right.
and a lot of us have the capacity of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. And we walk away hitting ourselves on the head for what we did. However, 'tis often better to acknowledge reality than it is to pretend it doesn't exist. And even a simple "how you doing" among the first pastor I worked under cautioned about, do be careful what you say in the receiving line at the end of worship. Because if you ask, how are you doing, somebody may tell you, and you may not be prepared to listen at the time. So if you're going to ask that question, be prepared to listen to the answer. And I think that was a very valuable lesson, because we can be very much into small talk. Or we assume that if there's been a tragedy or something where somebody's grieving, that, okay, it's been 6 weeks and 3 days and 2 hours, so they should be over it. And assuming that they will be, when that's not the case. And then you make a fool of yourself by. And I ran into somebody at the trolley this morning, and one of those situations where I still don't know what to say, and the person died March of COVID year, and I still struggle with what to say, because I was privy to the whole situation and that, but and then I've said stupid things. I was serving in Allentown, and we always went out to lunch after worship to the City View Diner. And we go into the City View Diner, and there's somebody from Richmond Church. And I say, and how's your husband doing? Well, he had died like 6 months earlier. And it was kind of like, maybe I don't need as big a breakfast as I'll just have a cup of coffee, please, and make that to go while I fall into a hole.
Yeah, but you don't know things.
You don't, and but a miracle. The miracle is that somebody else is willing to acknowledge that you're going through something, because as human beings, our natural inclination is to avoid pain. And if your pain connects with my pain and brings up the pain that maybe I thought I had processed, I don't want that to happen. So, any funeral I do, I can pretty much guarantee that I can look at the person in the coffin and think to myself, that'll be me someday. I don't mean to think that way, and I hope it doesn't come across as macabre, but it's a reality that when there is death, part of us recognizes our own mortality.
My vet, who was my landlord for a long time, I had lost my mom and dad within 2 years of each other, and Dr. Gregg had lost, I guess it was his dad, and he said to me something very interesting that I think is true. He said, you never get over it, you get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very true.
Yeah.
You do just get used to
Yeah.
it, but you never actually. I can still go to my mother and father's grave, and they've been gone a long time, and still come to tears.
Mhm.
You know, so.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way of putting it, because the reality is we have to go on.
Right.
And so we assimilate what took place in our journeys, but it doesn't mean that we've processed it. We accept it, but we don't necessarily approve of it. And it may be that it's one of those situations where we ask God for an explanation that doesn't come. You know, if I insist that God explain everything to me that takes place, then I'm looking at God as being kind of a cosmic Santa Claus of give me what I want, not you be God and I won't be. Again, there is a God, I'm not him, so I think I'll let him do it, do the God stuff. I'll try to fiddle around with this human stuff that means occasionally I come out of the trolley and fall flat on my face.
Did you really fall?
Yeah.
And he did.
Oh, and there were people watching. And
And he was
I
bleeding
cut
all over.
myself. I was
Oh, is that why we're
bleeding.
talking about that?
Yeah, and
When did this happen?
a week ago. The only thing that was good, I kind of could brace myself. We were in Disney World, and there was this kid who, there was an animal or a bird exhibition where you could go feed the bird. And he comes running up the aisle with his hands in his pocket, and he tripped. And I'll tell you, it sounded like a hollow coconut hitting the concrete. And it was one of those things where it was like for about a minute and a half, there was no reaction whatsoever. And then when he let loose, boy, did he let loose. And you're doing your best to not laugh. Because, he's boom. As we move forth and move into chapter 7, we get into some of the more image-based language about Jesus. water of life, what does that mean? How do we take that? Dips back a little bit to chapter 4, where we had the woman at the well, and Jesus saying, if you know who it was who requested a drink, you would ask him and he would give you the water of life. But it's these, one of those monikers that Jesus kind of gives himself and asks us to wrestle with what that means. If our descriptors of who we are usually pretty clear. My name's Dave, I'm a white, middle class, formerly middle-aged, heterosexual American male. Those are descriptors, not I am the nebula of the universe, or whatever, right? I may say. I mean, that's a good way to have people walk away from you at a party. So if you have somebody who's boring you to death, just come up with something real esoteric and watch them sneak away. And even to the extent of saying, I am Batman. Might help. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, at the end of the chapter here, they talk about many disciples desert Jesus. Are they actually talking about some of the 12 disciples?
No, it's more this following that I would say, I would put it more in the line of fair weather friends.
So maybe they really didn't process these miracles, or they didn't see them as miracles.
I don't know if they had the capacity to process it. And with some of this major miracle stuff, are they able to be processed? I think of even, who was that, Sully Sullenberger and the plane that went down in the Hudson. And I think, how did he do that? And almost back away because I have no clue how he did it. Right? It's so far beyond my understanding of reality that I can't even begin to grasp it. And I think that holds true with a lot of these followers of Jesus, that they were just so unable to even get a handle on what he was doing that they eventually lost, the novelty wore off. And they were fair weather friends. They were folks who, when their teams in first place show up at the games and when they're in last, are never seen. They're just not committed.
Yankee fans are that way.
Yankee fans, yeah. How's the saying goes that in having breakfast of bacon and eggs, in eggs the hen was around but the bacon was committed, because you had to kill the animal to make the bacon. The hen you didn't kill for the egg. It kind of loses its impact when I have to explain it. use as a sermon illustration, and all you do is see a set of blank eyes. Okay. Well, we'll throw that off the pulpit and let Ed pick it up on his way cleaning the
Do you
sanctuary.
think the disciples ever got, I mean, were they just expecting miracles constantly? Like, or,
One of the things that the disciples were expecting, if they subscribed to standard Jewish thought at the time, was that the Messiah would come along like a military leader who would rid the people of the Roman Empire and be established as a king over them. The miracles probably gave encouragement that this could happen. And so, yeah, they were maybe expecting more and more and more until this led to not even a revolution, but just simply a takeover that was going to take place. And they had to be seriously disappointed when this didn't come to fruition. I think that happens to us when we put our trust in any individual and thinking that, gee, this is somebody I can put my trust in and is going to do things that make my life work out better or whatever, and then it doesn't happen.
I think too, you gotta remember that these disciples were fishermen. They weren't college graduates. They were like a bunch of Tom Martins that you needed to smack upside the head every now and then.
But they were loyal. See, the loyalty of these guys, when you look at the calling of the disciples and say James and John, when Jesus called them and said, I will make you fishers of men, they immediately got up from their boats and followed him. That word immediate says something pretty powerful about the calling, because it wasn't okay, let me go through this process to determine whether or not this will be in my best interest. I think one of the things, in fact, Felker and I were talking about this at breakfast this morning, is that dealing with our clergy shortage in the denomination, maybe one of the problems is we don't call people to respond. We call them to enter into a process by which they can discern. Well, Jesus doesn't necessarily call us to discern. Jesus calls us to respond. And, do we put enough immediacy at times on people following Jesus in general? Or is it, let me offer to you this explanation of Jesus and this series of arguments as to why you might want to be considering him as your Lord and Savior. But by all means, take your time and take a look at Buddhism and Judaism and Hinduism while you're doing this, so that you can make an educated choice. That's not the way that it's supposed to work. There's supposed to be immediacy to it and loyalty. And so these disciples, up until the end, when they felt that their own lives were going to be threatened or in jeopardy, they stayed pretty loyal. Yeah, and I look at it from the standpoint that even though they fled in the end, that maybe if I were in that position, that's what I would have done. That, you know, if it came down to saving my own skin, yeah, I'd abdicate and go on.
Because they were only human.
They were only human, and their world had been shattered. You know, they followed. They had this hope of this takeover, if you will, and the return of Israel to prominence. And then when it got to the point where it was, wait a minute, this isn't going to happen that way. I better head off in a different direction. I'm already too heavily invested. You know, it's why after Jesus was crucified, they're hanging out in a house with the doors locked, you know, out of fear for the Jews. They're looking now at how do I abdicate from this investment that I made in this guy and go back to where I can walk the streets and not feel as though somebody's after me. And that, I mean, one of the strategies of the Inquisition was, if you wanted to survive, you were to recant your faith. And many people did. I mean, you know, there weren't that many that actually became martyrs to the end. One that, you know, legendary one was Don Quixote, who stood in to the end to where he was martyred. But most people said, okay, whatever, tell me what you want me to say and I'll say it so I can get out of here.
I'm wondering about Pocono Plateau summer camps. They still exist.
Oh yeah.
And I went to them at least twice, as I remember. The end of the week, the big deal was there would be a calling, and all the young people would go up front and claim that they wanted to be whatever, a nurse or in my case, I wanted to be a minister at 12 years old. I didn't want to be a minister. I went up there because everybody else was going up there.
Well, and that's...
And I'm just wondering if they still do that.
I think they do to some capacity. When I went to Camp Anaba, it was throwing a stick in the fire. That was your song.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of this comes down to faith-seeking understanding. That reality being, we did a youth, an overnight thing, one of those deals where we went to a Sixers game, and then there was a speaker following the game, and then we went out to some family fun center all night long. All I remember, it was like 12 hours of pure hell, chaperoning this thing. And they did an altar call at the speaker, and you know, all these kids went forward, and by the time we made it home on the bus, they had forgotten. And I think that it's manipulative when evangelism relies on mass hysteria.
Yeah. I mean, it was all, I think it's all done with good intentions, but I just think it's overdone.
Well, and we'll talk on Sunday again, it's kind of like the sower of the seed, right? You know, it may be that what takes place there is the seeds are sown,
Mhm.
but how people respond to them in the long run will be based on how ready they are. And yeah, you know, if all my friends went forward, I'd be tempted to, much like, you know, my mother would say if Peter King jumped off the top of the Empire State Building with you, and yeah, I probably would. You know, there's that sense of if everybody else does it, I'll do it, because I don't want to be signaled out as, you know, that all of a sudden there's all these dedicated disciples and I'm still heathen. Even if I am still heathen. And believe me, a lot of people who have come back from Pocono Plateau still heathen.
It would be interesting to go back and take inventory or whatever the word would be, to see how many actually went along with their conviction or.
Yeah, to follow through is, you know.
I have a question. What made you say you wanted to be minister?
I don't have a clue. Don't have a clue. I guess I felt obligated to say
Say
something.
something, and
That's
I-
what
That's better
And the next words were, "What have I done?"
and the trouble with that, there was a couple ministers up there that took that very serious and kind of like wanted to steer me in that
Mhm.
direction. And
Well, you can talk to Elizabeth when she comes back, because she's working there.
Yeah.
oh yeah, well, I don't know
Maybe
if I
she
would
can-
know.
Well, it
No.
would just be interesting to
Yeah.
know if she remembers what
Okay.
they did at the end.
What exactly is she doing?
Everything and anything.
Yeah, she kind of an all-purpose back there. But I, you know, it can be tricky, because there can be the mass hysteria thing that goes on. And that's one of those deals where, you know, you may plant seed a mile wide, but it's only an inch deep. You know, you may have a small percentage that actually follow through. I think more along the lines of some of our Roman Catholic brothers who make commitments before they're even teenagers of becoming a priest, and then are guilted into having to follow through on it. You know, which is kind of crappy. But it's kind of like I mentioned on Sunday that there was also a model that was thrown out that is not being used as much anymore, thankfully, which is that one went into the ministry because it was all roses and everybody loves each other and hugs each other. And
You could write a book on that.
well, you know, I think it's more apt that people are able to see realities in a lot of different things. You know, nursing is no longer just the image of Florence Nightingale, but is 12-hour days on your feet, dealing with irrational patients, and maybe if you're lucky, you find time to go to the bathroom. You know, that sort of thing. That maybe some of these reality checks are good, because we also have a high percentage of clergy who wash out within 5 years. And what's going on that this takes place? And trying to answer those questions can be helpful, if for no other reason that we don't take somebody like Tom Martin, who promised at the age of 12 to become a minister, and force him into it, only to make Tom Martin miserable for 5 years
Mhm.
until he decides
You know,
it's not worth it.
In the same token, though, then I got away from church for all those years, and for some reason I came back to church, and I can't explain how I ended up back here. I don't know what that was all about. So maybe there was something there implanted that I don't even realize.
Well, I do think that it's very true that a lot of us are beneficiaries of having faith planted in us at an early age. Even if I was one of those as a teenager, a walking awayer. And when I went to the Presbyterian church because there was this girl that I was just madly in love with.
And that'll do it every time.
And I would go and I'd sit in the balcony and I'd look at her and just, if only I had the courage.
Does that mean you should open up our balcony?
Yeah, that's
Maybe more people would come.
right. Do a singles event.